In that case, time travel is something you have to take very seriously, because Einstein's equations do allow for time travel.
Imagine vanishing without a trace after stepping into a machine you built in your own garage, then returning nearly 3 decades later with a warning too terrifying to ignore. In 1997, Mike Markham disappeared after activating a strange device he believed could alter reality itself. When the fire cleared, there was no body, no explanation, only scorched concrete, destroyed equipment, and a cryptic note. For years, people called it a hoax, a cover-up, or a failed experiment. But if Mike's return is real, then this was never just about time travel. It was about something much darker, being erased from reality while still alive. The night the garage became ground zero. In 1997, a strange and unsettling event unfolded in a quiet rural town, one that would later grow into one of the internet's most debated disappearance stories. Mike Markham, a self-taught inventor known locally for experimenting with high-voltage electrical devices, suddenly vanished after activating a machine he had constructed inside his garage. At first, the incident appeared to be nothing more than a mysterious fire at a private property. But as investigators began examining the scene, it quickly became clear that something far more unusual had occurred. What started as a local curiosity would eventually evolve into a mystery that challenged logic, science, and the boundaries of what people believed was possible. When firefighters arrived at the property, they found that the garage had been almost completely destroyed by flames. Yet the damage looked nothing like the aftermath of a typical electrical fire. At the center of the burned structure was a perfectly circular scorch mark embedded deep into the concrete floor. The ring measured roughly 6 feet across and looked as if an intense burst of heat had stamped itself into the ground with remarkable precision. Around the circular mark lay the shattered remains of Mike's experimental equipment, twisted copper wires fused together, cracked transformers, and fragments of homemade electronic devices scattered throughout the debris. To the investigators, the scene looked less like an ordinary accident and more like the aftermath of a powerful electrical discharge or some kind of uncontrolled energy surge. But what made the investigation truly baffling was not what authorities found, it was what they didn't. Despite the intensity of the fire, there was no body, no remains, and no evidence that Mike had died inside the garage. At the same time, there were no signs that he had escaped the building either. The fire patterns did not suggest that someone had been trapped inside during the blaze. There were no footprints leading away from the scene, no signs of forced entry, and nothing indicating the presence of another person. It was as if Mike had simply vanished at the exact moment the fire erupted, leaving behind nothing but the destroyed equipment and a burned-out workshop. Among the debris, investigators eventually discovered one object that had survived the blaze almost untouched. Inside a metal toolbox, they found a folded sheet of paper written in Mike's handwriting. The note contained only a single sentence. "It's not about time, it's about how you see things." Those words soon became the most haunting detail in the entire case. At first, authorities treated the incident as a missing person investigation, assuming that Mike might have disappeared voluntarily before the fire began. Without clear evidence of foul play or any reliable leads, the case slowly lost momentum and faded from official attention. Outside of law enforcement, however, the mystery refused to disappear. Over time, Mike Markham's story began spreading across online forums, paranormal discussion boards, and late-night radio shows fascinated by unexplained phenomena. The strange circular burn mark, the destroyed electrical equipment, and the cryptic message left behind fueled countless theories. Some believed Mike had succeeded in creating a crude time machine and accidentally transported himself somewhere else. Others suggested he had opened some kind of portal or dimensional rift. Skeptics insisted he had staged the entire event to vanish and start a new life under a different identity. Yet none of these explanations could fully account for the strange evidence left behind. The circular scorch mark, the ruined transformers, and the total absence of a body created a puzzle that never quite fit any ordinary explanation. For many who studied the case, Mike Markham's disappearance never felt like the story of a man simply walking away from his life. Instead, it felt as though something far stranger had taken place inside that garage. For a brief moment that night, it seemed as if the normal rules governing reality had been pushed aside, and whatever crossed that boundary never fully returned. The obsession that led to the experiment. Long before the mysterious fire and his eventual disappearance, Mike Markham was known simply as a self-taught electronics enthusiast living in rural Missouri. He had no formal training, no university laboratory, and no professional research funding. What he did have was an intense curiosity about electricity and an almost obsessive drive to experiment with it. Using discarded parts collected from junkyards and studying technical manuals from local libraries, Mike slowly taught himself the fundamentals of electrical systems. His garage eventually turned into a cluttered workshop filled with salvaged transformers, copper coils, wires, and homemade experimental rigs. To outsiders, it looked like the chaotic workspace of an eccentric hobbyist. To Mike, however, it was a place where he believed he was on the verge of discovering something remarkable. In the beginning, his projects were fairly typical for someone fascinated with high-voltage electricity. He built Jacob's ladders that sent arcs of electricity climbing between metal rods and experimented with Tesla-style coils and plasma discharges. These experiments produced bright flashes, buzzing sounds, and powerful electrical arcs that filled the small garage with energy. But over time, Mike began noticing something unusual that didn't behave the way standard physics suggested it should. During one experiment, he shined a small laser pointer through an electrical arc between two rods. According to Mike, the arc suddenly changed shape. Instead of flickering wildly, it tightened and stabilized, almost as if the laser had somehow influenced the electric field. Even more unsettling was what happened to small objects placed near the arc. Screws, washers, and coins positioned close to the electrical field seemed to flicker or blur momentarily. At first, Mike assumed it was simply a trick of the light or a visual distortion caused by the brightness of the arc, but the effect kept happening. On several occasions, he claimed the objects didn't just flicker. They disappeared briefly before reappearing exactly where they had been placed. They did not fall off the table or roll away. They were simply gone for a moment, then returned. That strange observation turned Mike's curiosity into a deep obsession. Instead of dismissing the effect, he began documenting everything about it. He recorded voltage levels, environmental conditions, object placement, and the precise timing of each experiment. His notebooks filled with diagrams, measurements, and observations as he attempted to reproduce the phenomenon again and again. Mike became convinced he had encountered something that conventional science did not yet understand. Whether it was an unknown electromagnetic reaction or something far more unusual, he believed the phenomenon was real, and he was determined to control it. As the effects became more frequent, Mike's experiments grew more dangerous. Brief disappearances of small objects were no longer enough for him. He wanted stronger electrical fields and longer-lasting results. In the summer of 1995, he crossed a dangerous line by stealing 6 industrial transformers from a nearby electrical substation. After wiring them together inside his garage, he created a powerful system capable of drawing enormous amounts of electricity from the grid. The impact was immediate. Lights flickered throughout the neighborhood, electronics malfunctioned, and a noticeable brownout affected nearby homes. Utility investigators quickly traced the disturbance back to Mike's workshop, leading to his arrest and a 60-day jail sentence. For most people, such an incident would have ended the experiments entirely. But for Mike, it only deepened his determination. After his release, he returned to the project with renewed focus. According to him, the effects had become even stranger. Objects now vanished for longer periods before reappearing in altered conditions. A wooden block reportedly returned unnaturally cold, as if it had been somewhere freezing. A flower came back wilted, as though time had passed differently for it. Most disturbing was his claim that a mouse disappeared briefly, returned confused, and died 2 days later. If Mike's observations were true, his machine was not simply making objects disappear, it was affecting whatever happened to them while they were gone. The radio calls that turned a local experiment into a legend. Desperate for someone to take his claims seriously, Mike Markham eventually turned to one of the few places where unusual ideas were welcomed: late-night radio. He called into Coast to Coast AM, the nationally known paranormal talk show hosted by Art Bell, a program famous for giving airtime to stories that mainstream science often ignored. Nervous but determined, Mike began describing the strange device he had been building in his garage and the bizarre phenomena he believed it was producing. He explained how small objects near his electrical setup seemed to disappear briefly before returning, something he believed might be connected to time manipulation or a disturbance in reality itself. Art Bell listened carefully, but pressed him for explanations. Was Mike actually describing time travel, or was it simply a trick of perception? Could the objects have been hidden by light distortions rather than vanishing altogether? Mike admitted he didn't fully understand what was happening, but he insisted the effects were real and repeatable. As the conversations continued, Mike's descriptions became more unsettling. He began claiming that whenever the experimental field activated, the entire atmosphere inside the garage felt different. The air seemed strangely heavy, almost as if the space itself had changed. Animals reacted strongly to it. Birds no longer landed near the building, and his own dog refused to enter the garage when the equipment was running. According to Mike, the phenomenon had grown powerful enough that he began experimenting with partial human exposure to the field. When he stepped near it, he said the outside world appeared to slow down while his own perception remained normal. Movements around him stretched unnaturally, sounds became distorted, and time itself seemed to lose its normal rhythm. What had started as the story of an eccentric electrical experiment suddenly sounded like someone standing dangerously close to something he barely understood. Art Bell eventually warned Mike to stop working alone and urged him to involve scientists before someone got seriously hurt. But Mike's mindset appeared to darken with each call. He began talking about unfamiliar vehicles passing his property and the growing feeling that he was being watched. Whether this was paranoia, stress, or a side effect of the strange experiments he claimed to be running, it only isolated him further. Still, he promised listeners that he would soon return with proof, video recordings, measurements, and clear evidence of what he believed his machine could do. That follow-up call never came. By early 1997, Mike Markham had gone completely silent. His phone numbers were disconnected, letters were returned unopened, and neighbors said the farmhouse looked abandoned. Then came the fire that destroyed his garage and transformed the story into a lasting mystery. With no body and no trace of Mike anywhere, theories spread rapidly. Some believed he had actually succeeded in crossing into another time, while others suspected a catastrophic experiment had erased him entirely. Over time, the story drifted into paranormal folklore, leaving Mike Markham remembered not just as a missing inventor, but as a man who may have stepped across a boundary no one else had ever reached. The discovery that reopened a 29-year mystery. Nearly 3 decades after Mike Markham vanished without a trace, the mystery surrounding his disappearance took a shocking and unexpected turn. In 2022, Andrew and Melanie Carter, who had recently purchased an old rural farmhouse in Ohio, made a discovery that would bring the long-forgotten case back into the spotlight. While cleaning out the attic of their newly bought home, they found a heavy wooden box hidden beneath layers of insulation and old boards. The box appeared untouched for years, covered in dust, and tucked away as if someone had deliberately hidden it. What immediately caught their attention, however, was the label attached to the lid. Written in faded ink were the words, "Ms. Markham, do not open until the right time." The name instantly stood out. Curiosity quickly replaced hesitation, and when they opened the box, they unknowingly revived a mystery that had remained dormant for nearly 29 years. Inside the box was a carefully arranged collection of journals, handwritten notes, and detailed technical diagrams. Some pages contained rough circuit sketches and electrical calculations, while others appeared to be personal research logs documenting years of experiments and observations. Dates written throughout the notebooks ranged from the mid-1990s, around the time Mike disappeared, all the way to entries as recent as 2021. Alongside the papers were fragments of electronic components, including copper coils, circuit boards, and small metal connectors. Some pieces were burned and warped, as if they had survived intense heat, while others were neatly wrapped in protective materials. Rather than random junk, the contents looked like the preserved remnants of a complex experiment that someone had intentionally archived. Among the items inside the box, one object stood out above all the others: a Polaroid photograph that left the Carters stunned. The photo was dated June 21, 2021, decades after Mike had supposedly vanished. In the picture stood a man beside a large ring-shaped metal structure that looked strikingly similar to the machine Mike had once described during his radio interviews years earlier. The device appeared crude but purposeful, built from cables, coils, and reinforced metal supports arranged into a circular frame. On the back of the photograph were a few handwritten words that felt both triumphant and unsettling. It did work, but not the way I thought it would. For anyone familiar with the old disappearance story, the message seemed like a continuation of a mystery that had never been resolved. Another disturbing discovery came when Andrew examined the journals more closely. One notebook contained the exact address of the Carter farmhouse, along with notes describing the area's magnetic stability and environmental conditions. According to the writing, the location appeared to be ideal for storing certain experimental components safely. This detail made the entire discovery feel far less like coincidence and far more like part of a carefully planned arrangement. Somehow, the man who had vanished decades earlier had known about this property long before the Carters ever bought it. The implication was unsettling. If Mike had prepared this box years in advance, where had he been all that time? The Carters eventually shared their discovery online, posting photos of the box, the journals, and the strange photograph. The response was immediate. Within days, the story spread across internet forums and communities fascinated by unsolved mysteries. Many people who remembered Mike Markham's disappearance quickly recognized the name, and speculation exploded. But the most astonishing development came only weeks later. Andrew received an unexpected phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end sounded tired and hesitant, but unmistakably familiar to anyone who had heard recordings of Mike's old radio calls. The man quietly introduced himself as Mike Markham, claiming to be the same inventor who had vanished nearly 29 years earlier. When Mike finally arrived at the farmhouse in October 2022, the Carters were shocked. He looked older and worn, as if he had endured years of isolation and hardship. Yet what unsettled them most was not his appearance, but his explanation. Mike insisted that he had never actually traveled through time. Instead, he claimed the machine had pushed him slightly out of sync with normal reality, like a radio signal drifting off frequency. He said he was still physically present in the world, but something about his existence had become unstable. People could see him and speak to him, yet their memories of him faded almost immediately afterward. Friends recognized his face, but struggled to remember his name. Conversations dissolved from memory within minutes, and even ordinary interactions seemed fragile. According to Mike, the machine had not moved him through time. It had disrupted the way reality itself held on to him. The man, reality, could no longer remember. Mike eventually gave a name to the terrifying condition he believed his machine had caused: unmemory. According to him, it was not death, invisibility, or traditional time travel. It was something far stranger. A person could still exist physically, walking, speaking, interacting with others, yet slowly slip out of recognition and memory. This was not ordinary forgetfulness or simple distraction. It was a deeper form of erasure, where the human mind could no longer hold on to the idea of that person. Someone could talk to Mike face to face, hear his story, and look directly at him. Yet moments later, the memory of that encounter would begin dissolving, as if it had never fully settled into their awareness. Andrew and Melanie Carter, who hosted Mike after his unexpected return, claimed they experienced this phenomenon firsthand. The moment Mike left their house, the memory of his appearance began slipping away almost immediately. His face became difficult to picture, and even the sound of his voice felt distant and unclear. Melanie rushed to write down every detail she could remember while it was still fresh, afraid that the experience would disappear from her mind entirely. Yet even those notes soon felt strangely disconnected, like records of an event that had happened to someone else. According to Mike, this was the real consequence of the machine. It had damaged his ability to remain anchored within human perception, making it harder and harder for others to remember him. If his explanation was true, the price he paid was more horrifying than death. Death leaves memories behind, but Mike believed he had become something far more tragic, a man who could still walk among people, yet never remain in their minds for long. A man who could return, speak, and warn others, only to fade from memory the moment he was gone. In that light, his final message takes on a far more chilling meaning. When investigators found the note in his burned garage that read, "It's not about time, it's about how you see things," it sounded like a cryptic comment about time travel. But perhaps it was never about time at all. Perhaps it was a warning about perception and what happens when someone loses their place in reality itself. Mike Markham's story remains one of the most chilling mysteries ever tied to the idea of time travel, not because it proves a machine worked, but because of the terrifying cost he claimed came with it. A man builds a device in his garage. A fire erupts. He disappears. Then, nearly 3 decades later, he returns with a story that suggests the real danger was never traveling through time, but slipping outside the boundaries of memory itself. Whether you see his story as science gone wrong, psychological collapse, paranormal legend, or something far harder to explain, one thing is certain. It leaves behind a question that is impossible to shake. What if the worst fate is not death, but being forgotten while you are still alive? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.